This I wrote myself. Introduction to Seasons of the Soul, 38 Poems by Beverley Manley. I wrote these poems over the span of my life with no thought of collecting them into a book. Some experiences were so powerful that they prompted me to strive to write a poem that would make them live as long as the poem lived. It could have been a scene, a mood, an emotion, an insight, a spiritual experience, or a story. I also wrote to vent the rage I felt when my indigenous friends described the injustices endured in boarding schools, deep wounds that sometimes would never be healed. The year of my birth was 1935. The place was Independence, Missouri, in the heartland of America. The Dust Bowl and the Great Depression were in full swing along with Prohibition. Kansas City, with its warring criminal gangs, added a sense of danger and drama, which stirred the dramatic flair in me. An early memory is of my mother cuddling me almost daily on the couch to read me poems and stories. She had the patience to help me memorize whatever poem I wanted. This she did from the time I was 2 until her death when I was 7. During this time, her father, who came from Germany as an adult, lived with us. He would lift me to his lap to tell me stories of his homeland, stories of the Black Forest and the lorelei singing on her rock in the River Rhine. He cuddled me close and sang so sweetly in his native tongue that music and poems and stories poetically told became entwined in my mind and soul forever, making me the poet and storyteller I have always been. Were it not for my mother and my grandfather, would I even be a poet? My mother's reading to me was our main way of sharing love. We didn't talk about personal things. In fact, no one in our family did. I thought it was strange, though I had no other family to compare ourselves to. One drear winter day, I think I was 5 and my sister June was 13, Mama made us sit on the couch so she could tell us something necessary to know. She began with, "You must always be stoic." "What's that?" I wanted to know. "Stoic means never showing your feelings, keeping your face like a closed book with no pictures or title on the cover, never telling anyone what you're feeling, never share your desires, dreams, goals, or loves, because the better someone knows you, the more power they have to hurt you. The ideal is to die with no one having known you." My stomach lurched at her last thought. It sickened my very soul. No, never. For me, a life lived like that would not be a life. Now I knew why the 6 of us never said anything personal at the supper table. I knew why there was no fighting, only an occasional stiff, cold, jagged silence, or thick tension in the air. Saddest of all, I never once saw any sign of affection between Mama and Daddy. The various atmospheres in our home fueled my poems for years to come. Up until Mama's unexpected death when I was 7, my need for genuine heart-to-heart connection grew painfully, energizing my drive to turn my feelings into a form of art. My first being classical piano, which I studied for 7 years. Going back to when I was 5, Mama decided quite suddenly that I would start first grade right then and not wait until I was 6. This was because I asked too many questions and begged a teacher teach me to read. This hasty decision brought to pass a dreadful scene that contributed greatly to my sense of not belonging. Minutes after Mama left me in Miss Broadway's care, I found this teacher to be either just plain mean or lacking in common sense. She pointed at me exclaiming, "You are the tallest first grader I've ever seen." Then pointing at a very tall boy said, "Come here, boy, stand with your back to hers." He came. "Look, class, she's a full head taller than he is, and this boy is a head taller than the next tallest boy." The kids had ample time to stare at the over-thick, long black hair on my skinny legs. This shaming encouraged the bully in them. For 3 years, till I moved to a different school, too many of them threw sticks and stones at me and called me names that hurt worse than the stones. They pushed me in mud puddles and sicked their dogs on me, but I never once thought of not going to school. There was fire in my belly for education. Deeper in my soul was fire for happiness itself. And right then, happiness meant education. As the teacher added her abuse to that of the kids, I felt anger, not self-pity. I did not feel like some poor little soul who deserved it. I knew I didn't. During first grade, I learned something far more important than numbers and the alphabet. I learned that I could choose my response, and that my response affected my happiness right then and in the future. Knowing this made me feel free, like a bird flying over what once were barriers. What does this have to do with generating poems? Experiencing my power to help direct my path in life kept the inner fires alive because I knew I could always do something, and that meant passion to pour into poems. Had I felt victimized, helpless, and hopeless, I would not have had the energy or the desire to write. In second grade, I learned another life-changing lesson that was not in the curriculum. It began with a choice the school had made, a choice I took advantage of. They hired a Negro lady to wash the little glass milk bottles that every student used each day. Negro was the polite word back then. I asked her to let me help her wash the bottles. "Oh, no, honey," she replied. "Go out and play with your friends." When she heard how they treated me, she gladly accepted my offer. We conversed about all manner of things. The more we talked, the more I saw that she was not inferior. Jim Crow teachings were lies, brutal, wicked lies. And sadly, Independence was a strongly Jim Crow town, the worst in Missouri, I've been told. That meant I was an alien in the town of my birth. More alone than ever, I cried softly into my pillow at night, because I could not change the mind of my Jim Crow mother, who simply closed her mind to logic. It was clear to me that all people of color were equal to us, and I wanted to help them. So when I moved to San Francisco in 1966, I took advantage of the chance to work with Native Americans. It was with them that I found my religion, close friends, and best of all found the second of my three greatest loves, the first having been my husband of 15 years, Ted Manley. Raymond Hunt, an Acoma Pueblo tribal elder and traditional drum maker, who I met at Intertribal Friendship House in Oakland, formally adopted me as his daughter and named me Moonflower for one who blooms in darkness. Poetry flowered out of this rich native soil, and it's amazing to think that this evolutionary path started with little glass milk bottles and a wise, loving African-American lady in a Jim Crow town almost 80 years ago. After following that story to its natural conclusion, it's a bit of a whiplash to return to when I was 9, but we must. Daddy remarried exactly 1 year after Mama died to a woman with severe personality disorders, after which came 10 years of a hell that I could not even imagine until I experienced it. I turned my suffering into poetry, poetry that molders away in some landfill today. During those years, using beauty and love, meaning nature, music, and dancing, as a way to having moments of real living, I came to understand that beauty and love would always be the engine, the spiritual way in which I would live, dream, and create. Indeed, art, the very soul of art before it takes a particular form, became the number one thing of importance in those 10 years. It's doubtful I could have survived without it. The line, "My head is bloody but unbowed," from the poem Invictus, became the mantra that kept me going. And when I was alone, I reveled in classic music and danced barefoot among bright yellow dandelions, twirling, pointing a toe skyward, lifting my arms to the heavens. When I was 9, my parents decided it was a sin to eat the flesh of warm-blooded animals in warm weather. This meant fish. Daddy had to feed a family of 4, and bless his heart, he quickly excelled at hauling them in. Lake Jacomo was close to Independence. In my mind's eye, I can still see its shimmering surface surrounded by dense green forest, no housing development yet. Daddy trolled or ran his overnight lines while I rode as silently as I could. No chattering, no radio. The smooth glide was like flow in poetry. The barely audible liquid sound of the oars, like cadence. The evenly spaced little eddies in the water, the verses of poems. 10 years of rowing from age 9 to 19 left this kaleidoscope of sensations deep in my very blood and bones, giving me a need to write poetry simply for the feel of writing poetry. From the time I began earning my own living at age 17, I preferred crunching numbers to managing people. The advantage of this choice was that it gave me myself. When I left the office, I left my job behind. And in San Francisco, that meant more things to explore and participate in. Yes, participate, because I had become head-turning attractive, and people reached out to me. Doors opened. I belonged. My husband and I reveled in concerts, ballet, art galleries, and museums. We took long hikes through coast redwoods, danced rock and roll, and so much more. All rich soil for poetry, and compost too. We lived across the street from the Pacific. From our window we watched the waves roll in and felt them. They sang us to sleep. We heard ships talking in the night, and the Pacific inserted itself into my poetry. Summer solstice is one example. Yes, indeed, San Francisco meant change, especially cultural. Drinking it in changed me in almost every way. Now I could jump up when the mood was getting ugly on a blocked streetcar, invite a hippie guitarist to play, and soon there would be singing, clapping, and dancing. I was able to dance at Ito's Taverna and join the powwow Indians. What absolutely did not change was the understanding that I was responsible for myself, just as everyone else was responsible for themselves. It would be enriching, my readers, if you and I could know one another. But of course we can't. It seems fitting then that I tell you something about the seasons and the soil out of which a few of my poems germinated. Almost assuredly, many of my poems are about things we all can relate to. Silence and quiet come to mind. It's my hope that these poems bring sweet memories of your own, memories renewed and refreshed into your own relationships. And if you too use words as your primary form of artistic expression, may the first two poems in this book enliven your own search for that one perfect word. Perhaps Why I Read Fiction will deepen your insight and sharpen your appreciation for the value of fiction. In San Francisco of '66, we were invited to rethink everything we thought we knew, and thus I found an American form of Buddhism, studied avidly, joined a Sangha, and am Buddhist to this day. It blends well with my ideas on indigenous spirituality. 7 poems speak of this. The Past is Not Past, Untitled, The Blessing Too Often Avoided, Caballo Lake State Park, Revelation, Rebirth Beside the Atlantic, and The Ageless One. When I divorced and moved across the bay to San Leandro, I found my second great love. 6 of my poems are about him. In Your Presence, The Ageless One, More Than One Man, Desolation, My Man of the North Woods, and So Radiant Your Humor. I wrote, Precious man so far from me, to the man I carry in my heart today. His name could likely be my last word. Mine is a dancing soul. If I were to lose my legs, my soul would continue to dance. Two poems here honor dancing and dancers. To Philip, a Greek dancer at Aitos Taverna, and dancing Greek at Aitos Taverna. Oh, how I delighted in the dancing itself, though not in the lifestyle I explored. That lifestyle was totally foreign to my romantic nature, which is to deeply love, honor, and admire one man. One cold, windy Valentine's Day in 2009, George Loftus and I were wed on the banks of the Rio Grande. It was for George I wrote my 4th of July 2015 while he was out of town. Every time I read the poem in public, he would cry. After he died in 2020, I wrote, "My heart cannot let go." Lastly, this high Chihuahuan desert in which I live never ceases to thrill me. Almost daily I stand on a high ridge and gaze in awe at ranges of mountains stretching for 50 miles. Mountains continually shape-changing beneath the moving shadows of clouds. And for me, our quickly changing weather is the very breath of this living desert. Two poems, March 25th, 1994, and Someday speak of my love for this enchanted land. The time has come to wrap this up and tie it together by emphasizing what I think is the most important source of lyric poetry. Love. Yes, love. All types of love. Be it love for friends and family, or such things as moonrise over snowy mountains. Yet romantic love, mysterious and profound, is the greatest source for me. Not all of us need or want romantic love, but those of us who do know that beautiful things become even more beautiful when we're in love. Myriad songs and poems over the centuries attest to this. And that enhanced beauty calls us to write poems about it. That's true for me. So I'm blessed to have romantic love given to me in my old age. There have been 3 great loves in my life, each one a powerfully life-changing season for me. In each of those seasons, I've grown in knowledge and wisdom, in appreciation of arts new to me, and in my own artistic ability and accomplishment. This new love is the very pinnacle, the crown jewel of my loves. This one is the most passionately tender and sweet, the most sacred and holy and life-renewing, even age-erasing. This new season of my long life is not the winding down it could have been. It's spring. Joyous, creative energy fills me. Exciting possibilities are opening up. New flowers are blooming, and I love my beautiful, cherished friends even more than before. Tender premonitions hint at something wonderful.